You saw in the case of Tucker Carlson, one of the things that people, I think, weren't fully aware of, Tucker's still getting, at least, and again, I don't have any inside information, but from all reports, Tucker's getting paid. The network's just keeping him off the air. Yeah. And I think that people miss that sometimes where...
Would you take 25 mil to be off the air?
I'd take 5.
All right, we are live in the local studio. I'm Dave Rubin. This is the Rubin Report, and joining me is the former White House press secretary, President Donald Trump, a former host at Newsmax TV, and host of the unnamed new podcast that I can't say is the Sean Spicer Show.
It could be.
The Spicer and something, or Spicier, or something.
All be to determine. Thanks for having me.
It is good to be with you. First off, just look at the two of us. I mean, we look like we should be hosting a show together. Or
all right, deal. That's it. We settled it. Maybe that's the new show.
We really set this up. What's the deal, man? You left Newsmax.
I did.
You're a free agent. You wanted to be free. I enjoyed doing your show.
Well, I'd love to have you. You could still. This is the beautiful part about it. Look, I think in this age that we're in right now, and I count you as a mentor and someone that blazed a trail. You look at Bongino and Beck, what Megyn Kelly's done, Liz Wheeler, the ability to go out and not be constrained by a network. Don't get me wrong, I'm not disparaging. I mean, they have a role, but it's a set time for a set amount of minutes. I looked at the upcoming cycle, President Trump's obviously the front runner in the Republican nomination. I spent 6 years at the RNC, last cycle as chief strategist, 2 presidential cycles, 10 members of Congress, countless campaigns, and I thought I have something to add, and I don't know that I want to be constrained by a network. And
was it just technical constraint, like meaning time? Like a lot of times when I do cable shows, even when I would do your show, it's like we'd have 6 minutes, let's say, and by minute 5, now we're getting going, and then they have
Correct.
So was that it, or was it more of a content, like they don't want you talking about certain things?
No. It wasn't that much. To your point, you have 6 minutes to break down a very complex subject. Why the rules of the party, why the debate structure is what it is. It doesn't lend itself to 6 minutes. First and foremost, and second, maybe you want to go on for 20 minutes, maybe you want to do some additional videos. The thing that people have to understand is that when you sign a network contract, whether it's Newsmax or Fox or ABC, the trade-off that you're making is, I will restrict what I do to that network. That's what they're buying from you. Is saying, well, you've got a lot of expertise or insight, and we're basically buying it from you so that you can't go anywhere else and display that. I get that. But there was a point at which I realized the future is independent media, the ability to put stuff out and allow it to go on different platforms. So maybe you want to put out a tweet, obviously Rumble and YouTube, locals. There's all these different ways of getting things out. And you look at the major cable stations, Dave, the average age of a viewer is 70 years old. Now, those are a very highly, it's a group that votes in a very high propensity.
They vote,
right?
Yeah.
So it's important. But if I want to have an influence in the next generation of Americans who I feel that I've got something to offer, talk about the ills of the direction of the current administration or what have you, I thought, is that really where I want to be and constrained to that? If I go and do something in the independent media field, I could still go on Newsmax, I could still go on CNN or Dave Rubin's show or Liz Wheeler's show and have a much bigger base to spread the message and the information that I think I have.
So long story short, you've been jealous of me for quite some time.
Very much. Mostly the hair. It's mostly the hair.
You're killing it in the hair game.
Yeah.
They've done something to you.
Right.
I don't know what have they done. Is it vitamins? What are they doing to you?
It's a lot of supplements. All those things that they sell. I dial all
You're
the
on
800
all of them.
Yeah. I mean, whatever Seb Gorka's selling, I got that. Yeah. But I do.
You want it to be free. I mean, in essence, you want it to be free.
I wanted to be free. I wanted to do, there's a trade-off that you're making. When you are a W-2 employee of a network, there are times when they're saying, these are the subjects we want you to cover, or maybe some subjects we want you to stay away from. I want to go where I want to go, where I think people need information, where I think they're not getting information. And if you think about the last few years, the most obvious being Hunter Biden's laptop, not that that was ever an issue to not talk about, but so many in the legacy media suppressed that story, and it had an outcome. I think that there are a lot of stories that don't get attention. And it has to do with why things work, how things operate. And that going in this direction gives me that ability to have that conversation.
Can you talk a little bit about how newsrooms operate? Because I think for people that watch my show, or they watch some of the guys that you just mentioned there, they watch Tim Pool, Megan, et cetera, you're just seeing one person take in knowledge, take in what's going on Twitter and everything else. And then I try to communicate that back to my audience over, let's say, an hour or something like that. But in a newsroom, it's a very different situation when you have, I don't know how many producers you had and all that. I'm guessing you're going to have a slimmed down staff now. I like a slim trim operation, but that's not for everybody.
Well, look, you have network considerations. So sometimes they're saying, here are the guests that we want you to get on. Here are the subjects that we need you to get covered. A show is basically broken up to, not every show, but most shows are broken up into 6 blocks, right? You do an opening and then you've got a commercial and then another segment or a guest and then you've got a commercial. So you got 6 blocks to figure out what you want. Sometimes there are subjects that you have to cover. Breaking news, network mandates, guests that they're requiring you to get on, books that they want you to review or what have you. And so it's a combination, and it depends on the day. There is no day where it's your show. I always told people, because I took a lot of viewer input through my website, SeanSpicer.com, they would email me and say, I didn't like that subject, or, why don't you do this? And I'd say, just because it has my name on the show, I don't own it. The network could call it any day and say, it's not Spicer and Company anymore, it's Company and Spicer, or whatever they wanted to. It's their network. I just work there. And you saw in the case of Tucker Carlson, one of the things that people, I think, weren't fully aware of, Tucker's still getting, at least, and again, I don't have any inside information, but from all reports, Tucker's getting paid. The network's just keeping him off the air. Yeah. And I think that people miss that sometimes where...
Would you take 25 mil to be off the air?
I'd take 5. I mean, I don't... Sure, I would take 25 million to be off the air. Yeah. I think Tucker's in a very different situation. He wants to have the influence. And I jokingly say that because I think that part of the reason I'm doing this is because I don't... everybody's got something. I got a brother who knows everything about sports. That's really not my thing. Some people are really good at art. I love politics and the media. I think that based on my 30 years of doing this, I have the ability to translate what's happening and why someone went to a particular place, why they gave the speech at that particular time, why they spent their money in their campaign in the way that they did, or maybe why it was a mistake that they did something the way that they did. Having seen it so many times over the years, and I think it's important to bring that to people because there are too many times when people are, if you go back to the sports metaphor, there's a million times people are armchair quarterbacks, and they sit back and say, he should have thrown right. And you go, except the fact there were 5 guys rushing him, and that might have made it difficult to see that. I think sometimes in politics, what I want to break down is the ability to say, I know that might seem obvious, but here's why that's a bad issue. And the most obvious thing, I always tell people this, when I was the assistant U.S. trade rep, for a long time, people had urged us to file an intellectual property case against China. They were stealing our movies. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people in the industry didn't want the government to file the case. And you think to yourself, that's pretty counterintuitive. Until you realize when we finally did file the case, there wasn't a movie from the U.S. shown in China for 6 months for censor reasons, right? That it was almost like the industry had factored in the intellectual property reasons. But that's not right or wrong. I'm just saying that there are sometimes reasons why things are happening in government, in politics, in the media that might not be as obvious to folks. And I think that because of where I've worked and what I've done, I have the ability to say, let me give you some insight into that to make you more informed as a citizen.
Do you think there's any parallel to any other time in media or politics, at least in modern times, where it seemed like everything was collapsing at once? Like, I'm basically of the opinion at this point, if the administration, this current administration, says anything, almost anything, I think it's a complete lie. Your former job, the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre is doing something remarkable, I think, that she is more dishonest than Jen Psaki. That's actually incredible. And they have the media on their side. When you were there, the media was against you. We've talked about that. Yeah. We can talk about it further. But my point is that the media is collapsing and our political establishment is collapsing seemingly at the exact same time, almost connected to each other, actually.
But, and I don't want to bring this back to obviously part of the reason I'm here, But that's why you've
But
seen.
you will.
Thank God,
You will.
But I will.
All right. See,
But I will.
You're an old
But this
TV
is
guy.
why you have flourished. Dan Bongino's flourished. Glenn Beck has flourished. Megan, Liz. I mean, all these people, because people are saying that's not honest. I'm watching it with my eyes.
Yeah.
I'm watching people flood over the southern border, and the White House press secretary is like, we have this under control. And you're like, okay.
Yeah.
And then I turn on NBC News or the Washington Post, and I see nothing. So where am I going to get somebody to tell me what's really happening? And I think that's where people are searching out these things. When you look, I've done Tim Pool's show twice. That guy gets numbers on a nightly basis, live, that some networks would kill for.
Yeah.
Because people are saying, I'm tired of being misled, lied to, have stories suppressed. And they're looking and they're searching for people who have insight and ideas that they're not getting anywhere.
But is it odd to you that these guys can't course correct? I always say it's like the media doesn't have to be great. I would just prefer they not be completely horrible.
But see, the problem is
they seem unable, like the Titanic. They see the iceberg.
I often wondered that myself. I'd say, why don't, like, after the 2016 election, I was in New York City. Obviously, that's where Trump headquarters was. Senior executives from NBC called and said, can we have coffee? Can we talk? So we had with this sit down, and they said, we realized we missed a lot of this. So we're going to set up these pop-up bureaus around America. And I'm like, so let me get this straight. You're going to go to like Cedar Rapids for like a week and think that like your New York dude is going to suddenly get in touch with all of these farmers and people who depend on the land. But
right, like
their idea was like it was like a field trip.
Yeah.
I mean, and there is a complete, utter misunderstanding and I think there was no bigger, to me, realization than when Trump did this town hall on CNN the other night. All of these folks on the left and in the media broke down the next day and apologized. Anderson Cooper went off on this rant. But here's the thing that I said.
You never watched CNN again.
But the thing that I thought was fascinating, Walter Shapiro put out an op-ed that said, we should never do live audiences again. And you're like, because why?
Yeah.
Because you didn't control it. Remember, that audience was handpicked by CNN.
Yeah.
But let me go back to Anderson Cooper. He gets on and does this monologue about how, I'm sorry if you were offended. Now, regardless of whether you like Trump or not, at the end of the day, he is currently the leading candidate for the Republican nomination. And according to ABC Washington Post, he leads Biden by 7. Okay, so that means, let's call it a majority of voters in both the primary and in the general are supportive of Trump. Who are you apologizing to? If you're supposed to be a down-the-middle media organization, in theory, you should be catering to 50-50. That's what CNN says that they do. So why are you apologizing? Because, 46% were offended or upset? Because they live in a bubble. And I'm convinced that gets to the nut of your question. They don't talk to anyone or see anyone that thinks differently from them. So they finish their afternoon, whatever they do after CNN, and then fly by helicopter to the Hamptons, hang around a bunch of people who think the same way they do, fly back, go to some fundraiser or charity event where everyone talks about the same things that they do. I just don't think that there's an understanding that there's another part of the country other than the one that they live in. And so it's an ignorance that I think is driving this.
You think it might have been a risk to call everybody a bigot and a racist for 10 years because then eventually you realize you can't talk to anybody else and you end up in that exact situation?
So I think for a lot of these folks, when you look at the parties, and Politico Playbook has a morning digest of who was spotted at what, it's always the same people at the same events talking to each other. On the left, they never invite anybody on the right. They just, and so the media folks are talking to a bunch of elected Democrats and political operatives on the left. So they all hear the same thing, and they think somehow that's just the prevailing narrative. I think that's the biggest problem right now, is that there is no cross-pollination. I say to people all the time, believe me, I get yelled at by Democrats, by folks on the left, by Trump haters. So I see it, I hear it. I'm very well aware that a lot of people don't like the Republican Party, conservative policies, Donald Trump. But I think for folks on the left, they don't see the other side. They don't think that there is anybody that supports conservative policies, that wants a secure border, that stands up for life. Those things to them are just, they don't get it. They're going, I don't know, who are these people that you speak of?
Right. Well, a guy like me is too out there for them. I mean, I've never been on CNN, ever. I've put out 2 best-selling books. We tried to get on CNN.
But you're a very reasonable person. Like, you've been on the left.
In a way, that's a bigger risk for them.
Right. That's the problem. It's a threat.
Yeah.
Right. So you talk about your evolution in your book. You've talked about the people that you've been around, the outreach. I know on your show you talk a lot about the efforts that you've made to reach out to Democrats to appear.
Yeah.
To them, they don't want you there. They don't want to hear another thing. It's funny. You think about like some of these Sunday shows. They have roundtables. They've never had ABC, CBS, one person that supports Donald Trump. Now, I think to myself, you may not like him, but go back to the statistics. He is the leading candidate, and he is currently either tied, maybe a point or two behind, or in front of Joe Biden. But it's going to be a close race if he's the nominee. And yet they don't want a single person on their show to give people perspective as to what he's doing or why. Why? Because you don't want people to know.
Let me ask you about the media strategy of your former boss, Trump. So one of my frustrations with him has been that he is feeding the very machine that you're talking about. By going on CNN, he's telling you they're the failing New York Times and failing CNN and they have no ratings. But at the same time, he's empowering that very machine. And to me, that's a real problem in terms of selective pressures. I would rather the machine just die and let's go to the new ground, right? Let's go to the promised land. What do you think about that?
I'm with you on that. I've never been a big fan of him supporting the people who are coming after him.
Maggie Haberman, he keeps doing interviews with her.
And he's got a fixation with some of these legacy outlets, particularly the New York Times, because he considers that his hometown paper still. I would much rather him put his efforts in supporting shows like yours, shows like What Will Be Mine. Why not? I don't, because here's the thing that so many times people say, well, you're just talking to yourself. That's not true. If Trump talks to Dave Rubin, the New York Times will write about it. NBC will cover it. It's just a fact, right? And they will cover this. So why not support the people who are trying to build up this ecosystem of folks on the right and allow them to be successful? So
did you ever give him that kind of advice when he was
I tried once, and I was very clear about a particular, right after the election, he was going down to the New York Times to meet with the editorial board. I was not in favor of that. He let me know in very stark terms that he really didn't care what I thought.
Well, so your feeling was, they're going to lie about you no matter what.
Well, why are you? I also thought, why are we rewarding them this close to after the election? They didn't help us. They hated us, and they're not going to change their position because you go to them. In fact, I thought optically it looked bad. You are the president-elect. They come to you. You don't go to them, number one. Number two, why of all the organizations are they at the top of the list? They should be at the bottom of the list. If you want to do them, have a bunch of conservative folks, media in, have some people that were treated you fairly, and then get to them. But at the why are we leading with them? But, his view was, I can handle anyone. He can. And it's not, I always viewed it as he handled himself, I think, brilliantly at the CNN town hall. It's not a question of can you handle it, but he gave them 3.1 million viewers that night, the highest. They beat every other station. And so,
well, I guess he understands that if he does that for them, they'll keep talking about him, and then he'll go back to them. So that's what I'm saying. It becomes this odd self-fulfilling prophecy that they'll both continue.
Right.
And I think that's sort of a problem at this point.
I agree. And part of the reason that I've never supported him doing that, and I still don't, is because of that exact reason. I think that the more that we give them credence to go after him, he talks to him, no one treats him fairly. I mean, he has sat down for books, interviews, documentaries, you name it, and it always comes out looking poorly on him, no matter what. And so why let that happen? Because if he goes and talks to somebody else, they'll still cover it. So you'll get your thing. You're not going to win them over. It's just not going to happen. And I think that's what, I think somehow he believes if he keeps chipping away, he has this businessman mentality, and I get it, which is I'm going to get a deal with you. You're going to like me. And I think people probably do come away liking him, saying, wow, he's not what I thought. They're not going to go back to their editor and say, I tell you what, it went really well. I'd like to write something nice about the guy. Right. That's not going to happen.
Talk to me about your old job. We've talked about this a bit before, but when I watch, how long was your stint? It was pretty.
7 months.
7 months. And then Sarah.
Then Stephanie, then Kaylee.
Right. When I watched the last two, Psaki, who just everything was a lie after lie after lie, and then this one, Karine Jean-Pierre. I mean, it is extraordinary. When you're watching her, are you pulling your hair out like, how the hell could it be this bad? I get it.
So,
a press secretary, you have to
So I would say this: as much as I agree, Psaki at least was a professional. Okay, first of all, Jen, and just so the audience understands, when you transition, Jen and Josh Ernst were very kind to me. I wrote about this in my first book, and they treated the transition in a very professional way and said, you know what, we disagree with you, but our job is to make sure you're ready to govern and that you guys are successful. And I'll never forget that. I give them credit for being very professional and helpful, because they were. Jen, for what it's worth, is qualified to do that job. She had served as State Department spokesman. She had been on several campaigns. She had been with Obama. You may not like the answers, and I get it. And I don't disagree.
I accept that there's a resume.
Karine Jean-Pierre is not qualified to do the job. Yeah. Okay? And every single day we hear it, we watch it, we see it.
She's a black lesbian, for God's sakes. What do you want?
Exactly. But that's the point. Is that this is the new standard, which is what box can you check, not are you qualified, are you experienced, can you do and this isn't like personal. She literally was a field operative before doing it. So if she got sent to the the political affairs office, I'd say, great, that makes sense. She was on John Edwards' campaign. She had done a bunch of races in New York. I get that. She just never dealt with the media before. She wasn't someone who was familiar to them. She doesn't understand the care and feeding. And so it would be like somebody parachuting into, the political affairs job. You'd say, why are you doing that? They wanted her because she checks boxes, and it shows every day. And the thing that upsets me more than that is the way that the White House press corps nods up and down as if what she's saying is A, true, and B, as if she knows what she's doing. They're complicit in this. And that's the thing, is that I couldn't get away with things that were factually true, but they would say, well, technically, the North Star was placed a little. I mean, they were trying to find ways to slice and dice it. With Karine, she blatantly gets up there and talks about the president's policy led to a 90% drop in border crossings. That's patently false. And yet she gets away with it. She talks about the president taking more questions than shouted questions than anyone before. I mean, you could hate Donald Trump and say there's no question. Every day the guy was standing next to him when the propeller went off, taking questions for 15, 20 minutes a day. Joe Biden hasn't talked to anybody for that long.
What does that tell you about the people in that room at this point? I mean, they were obviously oppositional to guys like you. Right. They're always going to be oppositional if there's a Republican president. They're not oppositional now, and she's still doing a pretty, I would say, piss poor job.
Yeah.
Well, maybe she's doing exactly the job that
look, I think part of it is, remember, if you're on the team, then that's all that matters. Yeah. So she's on the team in several ways, right? She had been working at MSNBC. Her partner works at CNN. Yeah. She is a liberal. So she fits they're not going to hurt her because they know that she's got to end back up at CNN or MSNBC when this is all done. And that's what's going to happen.
Does it ever feel to you like we're in just the show must go on version of all of this? That's what it feels like a lot to me. Like none of it really works. We all kind of know it doesn't work. We know it's all corrupt. I'm talking about politics, media, the whole thing. But it sort of has to continue because if we were to really be confronted with the reality that none of it works, man, it would collapse in a very dangerous way, perhaps.
It's worse than that. Because if you knew how little the government was prepared for certain things. But also, I look at the threat that China poses.
At this point, I'm happy they're not prepared for things. Well, they can only make things worse.
But you look at the threat that China poses, the rise of our debt, all of these things, and say it's right there. I get a kick out of this, but there was in the first. There was a scene where Dr. Evil is going after Scott Evil, and he's trying to kill Austin Powers in that first Austin Powers movie. And he sends him down to, I think, be with the sharks. And Scott Evil says, can't we just deal? He's right there. We can shoot him. I have a gun. And Dr. Evil says, no. We're going to put him in the shark tank where he obviously subsequently escapes. And so many times in government, the solution's sitting right in front of you. And you could say, can't you just solve that? And they go, no. You know what we're going to do? We're going to create a commission, or we're going to create a study. And you're just punting. And I feel like whether it's the border, China, the debt, all of these issues, the government just doesn't want to act. And love him or hate him, the thing that I loved about Trump was that he would look at something bad, a trade deal, And I joked about it from the podium, but I'd been the assistant U.S. trade rep under the last 3 years of Bush. And we were told over and over again, well, this it's called being in force. This trade agreement's in force. We can't do anything about it. Unfortunately, we've all signed our names. Trump started to go, I don't really care. It's a bad trade deal. We're pulling out of NAFTA. And everyone's like, oh. And what happened? We ended up signing USMCA. Mm-hmm. Better deal for Wisconsin dairy farmers, Alabama automakers, over and over again. And you go, is that bad? We pulled out of Iran. We pulled out of, we did things, the Paris Climate Agreement, and everyone said the sky is going to fall. When you're not concerned about the fact...
Jerusalem embassy was supposed to start
World War.
Yeah.
And not only that, but it went from not causing world war to the Abraham Accords, which, allowed for countries that hadn't talked. We have flights going over places. You just came back from there a few weeks ago where we now have things, but somebody has to be willing to say, I don't mind because it's always been done this way. I'm willing to take a chance and do it the other way, or if it's better. And that's not... This is, I'm sorry because I'm a shameless self-promoter here, but this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. That to explain to people that there are better ways to do it. I watched President Trump do it. I watched the sky not fall. And so, part of as we do this is, and I don't want to bury the lead, but part of the show is we're going to build this all in local, something that you've done. And we're going to have a section where VIPs can tell me, what do we want to hear? What are you guys interested in? What do you think we need more of or less of? And how do you want me to present this? Or who would be a good person to bring in? Or what kind of expertise? And that's the beautiful thing about doing what I'm doing, is that through the locals community, our VIP members can be part of this process and say, I want to know more about this. Why is the primary and caucus system set up the way it is? Why can't we stop the flow of illegal immigration? Why is, whatever it is, I might not be the best person, but I certainly know who is. And that's the other thing. I might, be able to call in somebody and say, hey, I keep getting questions from our locals audience that they want to know more about whatever. So let me get, Chad Wolf to come in and explain it from the Homeland Security standpoint, or Tom Homan to come in and talk about it from a border security standpoint. But I think there are things going on, to your point, that it feels like we're just doing something. The debt, this is insane what's going on with our debt. Every year, we keep having the same conversation and saying, well, we can't talk about it right now because we don't want to default. But then once we raise the debt ceiling, we forget to have the conversation. Right. And we keep reissuing the credit card and saying, we've raised your debt limit. Just please kind of don't maybe spend as much. Biden every day talks about more spending. And we're supposed to believe that this guy is going to be concerned about the long-term debt and debt ceiling?
Is the problem with the debt ceiling, though, that people just know that they will just raise the ceiling? So
yes.
It's just like, yes, just keep raising it.
But
did like a well-known economist ever come into the White House while you were there and be like, guys, here's actually the reason why we can't do this forever, something like that? Because Trump did it too, right?
Sure, Trump did it too, but the difference is, and again, I don't give anyone a pass, just so we're clear, right? But at the end of the day, there's a difference between a worldwide pandemic where both parties are saying we need to take care of this. I was not in agreement with all the spending, but then again, that's not my job. And we're seeing now when we're clawing back spending, it's because no one thought it through the right way and there was no accountability. But the bigger point is, no one is willing to care. Like if you keep saying to folks, well, the interest on the debt is going to rise and it's going to crowd out stuff in 2047, they're like, okay, right?
Right, like we'll figure it out then.
Right, it's sort of like, when if you think back, a decade ago when we were doing these loans where there's like, okay, we're going to give you a really low interest rate, but then there's a balloon payment in 15 years. Like balloon payment, like it's 15 years until that balloon payment comes. And the point is, we're crowding out other spending within a couple decades so that we're going to literally have a conversation where it says, unfortunately, we're paying so much interest on the debt that we can't do certain things.
What do you think it would take to actually have serious people, again, involved in politics and then media? Obviously, we're here in Florida. You know my feelings about what's going on here in Florida and what the governor has done and everything else. It seems to be working here.
It is.
And it's working in a couple other red states. But how do you scale that, do you think?
I think Governor DeSantis has done a great job of going to other states and talking about how to export Florida.
Yeah.
Because the thing that I've always appreciated about DeSantis is that he does a lot from the gut, which means it's not poll tested. It's like, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
He's helping law enforcement. He's helped teachers. He handled COVID well. And I think that part of this is to give these governors and other elected officials, the understanding that if you do the right things for the right reasons, things will happen well, right? You can't govern yourself by a bunch of polls, and too often that's what happens. And that you have to be willing to take a hit. If you think about COVID with DeSantis, he got hit, roughed up a bunch at the beginning in terms of the testing centers. The first few weeks probably, and my timeline may be a little off, but it wasn't perfect. 8 weeks, 12 weeks in, or whatever it was, people were saying, wow, look at how well this is working. These centers that he set up at the different Publix or what have you. I'm not from here. So
well, you could get monoclonal treatment, which I got literally the day I got to Florida. I tested positive for COVID. When we moved here, I went to a center. Within an hour, I had monoclonal treatment. And the worst thing that happened to me at the height of COVID were my legs hurt for a couple of days. That was it.
But the point is,
oh, and then the federal government made it illegal to do monoclonal treatment.
Right. But the point is that you have to be willing as a leader to take that chance and to say, I know what the right thing to do is, and I think it'll pay off. And it may not pay off 24 hours, it may pay off in 24 days. DeSantis has done that a lot in Florida. You've seen Kim Reynolds in Iowa do that. I think Sarah Sanders is doing a good job. I loved your conversation with her a few weeks back. But she's doing things that I think, you asked her on the thing, what about criminal justice? She said, you know what, there were some people that weren't great, but I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do. That's leadership. And I think that we need to see more of these guys willing to stand up and say, I'll take the hit. Sometimes it might not be perfect, but I know what the right thing to do is.
It's true at a gut level, too, not just at a policy level or a success level, because, DeSantis did this 6-week abortion thing.
Right.
I'm personally not for that. I think the 15-week thing was fine here. I go to all the Republican events. I never heard anyone complaining about abortion. I thought we had it right. I think for the general, it looks way better if you're at 15 than 6, just optically. But then I heard him talk about it like a week or two ago, and basically he was like, that's my personal belief. The people voted for me. I'm doing what I think is right. And I was like, I have to respect that. I may not agree with the decision, but it's also nice to respect somebody that's in office.
But you got to think about it. To your point, he did something that he said, I might not get there. If you polled it, you might get everyone to say what you said initially. 15 weeks is great. He said, you know what? I'm willing to go further because I want to stand up and fight for life. I believe the following. He was willing to take a risk for the right thing. We need more people like that. If you sit back and if his calculation was, gosh, 6 I believe in my gut, but gosh, it's going to cost me politically. That's the problem.
I know that's the problem. And he knows look, it has to. I don't see any way around it. It doesn't hurt you in the primary, a Republican primary, but my guess is it does hurt him in the general. So that shows guts. That's my point.
Right. Yeah. And I think the general big sense of it is where he's done well is that instead of like a lot of Republicans that have stuck their head under the chair and said, I don't want to talk about it, and I hope this doesn't happen. If you're going to sign it and you believe it, go out and fight for it. And he has at least gone out there and said, I believe in this. Here's why it makes sense. You have to take these issues head on if they're going to be controversial. If you're going to fight for it, then fight for it. But you can't vote for it or sign it and then say, okay, I'm going to go duck and hide. Right. The Democrats, politically, they know that they might have something if they out-message you.
Speaking of fight for it, so what do you make of what's going on here with Trump and DeSantis? Because it's getting, DeSantis hasn't even announced yet. It's obviously happening at this point. Right. Trump, to me, has thrown in the kitchen sink at this point. I mean, going after Florida the way he is, like, I like him. I voted for him. I'm friends with the kids. All of that stuff that I always say first. But I think his behavior towards DeSantis, who has been by far the best public servant that we've had in America for the last 3-4 years, it's a real turnoff to people, I think.
So here's, and I hear that. I was at a big Trump event probably a month and a half ago. And the message, they said, when you talk to the president, can you tell him, we love him as president, we love DeSantis as governor, let's not. I agree with that, okay? I don't like red on red. I don't like conservative. We need to support each other, whether it's conservative media, conservative policies. Get behind things. Don't attack, whether it's, even on...
Well, that's what I keep saying. Make the case for yourself. There's a case to be made for Trump.
Oh, and I've said that to him because I think everyone else runs around and says, I want Trump policies, I want America First policy, I'm not Trump. My point to Trump has been, you're Trump. Just say, I am him. Like, I'm not trying to be him.
Yeah.
That being said, so would I rather have him making the case for him, DeSantis making the case for him? Yes. That being said, it's very Sun Tzu what Trump is doing, which is prior to the end of the Florida legislature, that they moved it up more than I thought they would, but end of April, they changed that resign to run law.
Yeah.
Trump knew that DeSantis's hands were tied.
Yeah.
So why not just keep, I mean, imagine that you're literally having to fight somebody physically, and they say for the first 5 days of the fight, their hands are tied behind their back. You can whack at them for those 5 days. Why wouldn't you?
But I don't think it worked.
I mean, look at the poll numbers. They did work. I mean,
I think
Trump went up.
We'll
just
see
saying now,
soon
maybe,
enough,
but I get why he did it. He took the free shot and said, I'm going to take DeSantis' numbers. I'm going to bring them down. I'm going to try to make mine. Because what he was trying to do during that time is convince donors and strategists to say, look, this guy can't take a punch. Look at his poll numbers go down. Look at mine go up. Do you really want? Trump was doing a Sun Tzu thing, which is don't have the fight you don't have to have. Mm-hmm. And so if he could get DeSantis to reconsider running, which I don't think he was going to do, and say, maybe I don't want to do this.
Well, I think that's what the goal was. I think it failed.
Right, it did.
Yeah.
But I think that the idea was not, and if you can't get DeSantis to do it, can you show these major donors and operatives and activists and grassroots supporters, that's the guy you want to hitch your wagon to? Here's how we're going to punch him. Here's how my poll numbers are going to go up and his are going to go down. That, to me, was the strategy, is to convince everybody, you really want to do this.
Is the bigger problem there, and I don't mean to make this fully about Trump and DeSantis, but just sort of broadly about politics, that the more that sort of stuff goes on, these nonsensical games and all that stuff, it just will keep culling the field. We'll just never get good people in. You know, my argument for DeSantis, it's not just that the proof is in the pudding. Like, he's a good person, too. It's fairly obvious. And also there's a generational shift that I think needs to happen. But that basically, if we're always going to be willing to throw out every trick in the book and treat everything like it is, you know, a war in China 2,000 years ago, that we'll get what we deserve, which is a bunch of sellouts and nincompoops, basically.
Yes and no. I mean, so despite all that, as we said, DeSantis is running. So it didn't work. And I also think that Trump is, you know, I've said this before, so I'll say it again, I think he's a unicorn, politically speaking. You're not going to see another Trump. So once this cycle is over, I don't...
Just for the hair alone, I mean.
Yeah, there you go. I don't think you're going to see him again. No one can pull this off like he can. So I think there's a uniqueness to this cycle. You're not going to have another former president, second time in history that this has happened, that you're going to find somebody that tries to do this again. It's just not... So we're in a very unique period in time, I think. That being said, are you going to see people lay off their opponents? No.
All right, we can talk about Republicans all day. Let's do a little bit of Democrats, and then we'll move on to some other things. I mean, Biden's going to be 82 by the time he would
take office. Yeah,
82. He obviously has something wrong with him cognitively. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. They refuse to talk about it on mainstream media, which gets to what we were talking about earlier. What is going on with the Democrats? I mean, do any Democrats talk to you anymore?
No. But I mean, look,
in DC.
Here's
What's
the thing:
going on
they
over
don't. I will say this: I don't know how much Biden gets credit for this, or his team does. By putting Kamala Harris as his vice president, it was genius. Yeah. Because you're basically saying, you don't want me, you want her? Okay, stick with me, folks.
Yeah.
I mean, I did a video on YouTube that people should go look at because I believe that the Democrats have bet the farm. If you go to my YouTube page, I lay this out. This is how Kamala Harris becomes president of the United States. They believe that Biden can sneak by Trump. He sneaks by, whether he steps down or... Look, and it's not... I feel like, to your point, people can't talk about it. Let's be honest. The average life expectancy in the United States for a white male, is 74.2 years old. Biden's 80 now. Okay? He's on borrowed time. That might be rude. Those are facts.
No.
So that whether he steps down, he gets removed by his cabinet... impeached or something like that, he's not going to serve out a second term.
Right. I mean, it could happen.
Right. So it could. Right. So my point is that this is the play. But you look at Harris. Within her own party, she's been rejected. She didn't even make it to the Iowa caucuses last cycle. Her poll numbers are underwater tremendously. And then the next leading people, the Pete Buttigieg and the Gavin Newsoms, are stuck at 6-7%. They have no bench. Which is kind of shocking to me, the sense that of all of these young people that you tout and that you get, I mean, there's no one that gets double digits outside of a sitting vice president. I mean, that is mind-blowing when you think about it.
It sort of tells you no one even believes this nonsense. Like they somehow made the right move with Biden because it did accomplish the goal of getting the presidency, but there's just nobody believes any of the ideas.
Or that that their party doesn't know what they want, that no one's stepping up to the plate. They're all playing. The problem is, this gets back to what you were asking, question before this. You think about the people I mentioned, whether it's Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Gavin Newsom. They're not authentic. They're not out there talking about the real problems that people are facing and saying, here's what I would do and here's how I would lead. They're full of talking points and identity politics.
But roads are racist.
Of course they are. I drove on one in the pothole. I could
It got
tell.
right out of your way because you're white.
It did. And my privilege, I was like, you get out of the way and I'll send the other people down that ravaged road. But that's the point, is that people look and say, this isn't what I wanted. But the idea that nobody's willing to step up to the plate in the Democratic Party and be that person that's the ascent, that's the next coming. I mean, you think back through history on the Republican and on the Democratic side, it always hasn't worked out. I mean, we had Scott Walker on our side, very, very successful governor in Wisconsin. He led the field for a while, kind of faded out, but then other people kind of filled it in. Bill Clinton, back in the day, you had John Kerry in that same race in '92. There were people. It was a battle of the mind. Who could be the leader? And Clinton making the case then as the chairman of the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Committee, that like this more moderate tone was what we needed to embrace in the Democratic Party. Them fighting it out and them going forward. The idea that they have no one now, they can get double digits. That says a lot about where they're at. But you just have to look no further than the Pennsylvania Senate race to understand why. They will elect whoever you put on the ballot, or they'll vote for him. So it's just a question of who can get 13. My view is, in the next open race in the Democratic Party, if Biden were to sneak by and Kamala Harris were to come in, that seals it, right? You can't. No one's going to challenge her in a serious way. But it will be interesting because whoever sneaks by, my guess is with a plurality. But you even look at Robert F. Kennedy, he's polling just shy of 20%. They're doing everything they can to shut that guy out. Yeah. Not only that, you got ABC censoring his speeches. You
got YouTube censoring his speeches. Yeah.
But they don't want anybody as an alternative to him.
Yeah. Do you sort of admire the ruthlessness of the DNC at some level? I mean, you can say all you want about the Republicans, but the Republicans who obviously didn't, the machine didn't want Trump.
Right.
But Trump won fair and square, and they let him become the nominee and eventually the president.
Right.
The DNC, they're going to do everything they can to make sure Robert F. Kennedy is a Republican by the end of this thing.
Oh, yeah. And that he is not allowed on a debate stage, that they'll do everything they can to limit ballot access.
I keep saying he should just say I'm a Republican now, and at least they'll put him on the debate stage.
He could.
I don't know what make.
Actually, you know what I would love? I would love him to run as an independent.
Yeah.
That's where I think that if you're a Republican, you want Robert F. Kennedy, because he gets on 5, 6, 10 states. That's a big enough deal.
But you don't think that hurts the Republicans more?
Oh God, no.
You don't think it gets the people, let's say it's Trump, who are just totally Trump deranged, to be like, not going to vote for Trump, I'll vote for him.
So people who generally,
you could probably argue it either way.
So people who generally don't want to, when you're given a binary choice, it's Biden versus Trump. Then they're forced to pick, and they'll say, I don't like Trump, but I hate Biden. I'm either A, going to sit out, or B, I'll hold my nose and vote for Trump. If they're not going to vote for Trump in the first place, then you're just giving them a place to move move over to. It actually, I think, would benefit the party to have him. The big thing that was interesting, if you look at 2016 versus 2020, the absence of third parties, if you think about Jill Stein, the Libertarian candidate, she was the Green Party candidate, but the Libertarian candidate, there were at least 15 states where the third party's margin made a difference in 2016, and that didn't exist in 2020.
What was the Libertarian? What was her name again? Anyone remember? Jo Jorgensen. Did you ever interview her? Poor lady. I had her on the show once. She does like an hour selling me, and I'm in many ways I am a libertarian, obviously. But she does an hour selling me on everything, and then at the end she made the cardinal mistake of saying, "So are you going to vote for me?" And I said, "No, I'm voting for Trump." It was like, I think that was her most viral moment of the whole time. But the point is that these third party people, they basically don't exist at this point.
Well, they give you again, this gets back to this whole idea of like what's important to understand. Ballot access is huge.
Yeah.
Getting on a ballot in a lot of states, if you're not a major party, is a big deal. And so how does the Green Party get enough signatures or do well in a previous election where they maintain that ballot access? Because if you can't, it's either you have to pay a ton of money, you have to get the signatures, which costs a lot of money, and then you're off the ballot. And if you can't get on there, then who cares? You're a non-factor. The only decisions that matter are the ones that people have to make. And if they can't vote for you, then it's a non-issue.
When you leave D.C., now you're still going to do the show from D.C.-ish, is that fair to say?
Yeah,
I don't want to...
yeah. It's fair. I'm not breaking any news up.
Okay.
My wife's not going to...
Yeah, okay. I don't know.
Yeah, I got kids. My wife and my kids are going to be like, yes.
Yeah. Do you ever fear being too close to just, I mean, literally like the proximity to D.C. and just the sort of nepotism and the whole thing can kind of color your view of all of this?
I'm from Rhode Island. A lot of my family's there. We have a place there. And so we spend a decent amount of time there. I love getting out. I do a lot of things beyond politics that bring me around the country. And so getting out, and this gets back to what we talked about earlier, where a lot of these journalists don't, getting out and among people. I do a lot of, I'm on the board of 2 veterans organizations that bring me around to places. And so I get to see people that don't care about politics. That's not top of mind. They're worried about, healthcare issues, making enough money for their kids or themselves, making a rent payment or something. So you really connect and understand what's on the top of mind of people, their concerns, safety, security, threats from abroad, whatever it is that you don't necessarily pick up in DC because everybody's got an agenda, and sometimes it's not always it's not always genuine.
You're telling me people in D.C. are not always genuine?
Breaking news on the Rubin Report.
You're really going for it. Now that you're untethered by the corporation, you're really going for it. Oh, yeah.
I'm willing to throw it down.
Do you have any fears of going totally independent and
Sure.
not having that structure behind you?
Yeah. And the biggest fear is just more of like a personal nature. Like a healthcare or meaning that if you have to go somewhere for 5 or 6 days, I know you were just in Israel a few weeks ago. If I got sick, what does that mean? How do you sustain yourself? There are things that you have to worry about, but again, it's a binary choice. I can sit and I was offered a contract to stay with Newsmax, and that was the decision. That I said, okay, do I want the next 2 years to continue like this, or do I want to bet on myself? Do I believe that I can build something? I've got a great team. I've partnered with a very successful conservative production company that has done very, very well putting shows on.
So you're building the home studio, the whole...
Oh, no. This is not a home studio. We're looking at locals.
You're going to it all. Well, you can use this in Miami anytime.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I might be coming just in the winter months.
Yeah.
But so we're building out a studio in DC. I do have a home studio that I can do things from. But we are making something network quality that, and again, part of this is even from a set design or whatever. I want the folks at locals to be part of this process and to say to me, hey, I hate when people sit, too far away from each other. Why don't you, stand up? Or, we'll pose questions.
Yeah.
We'll bring these guys into this discussion. And we've got a couple months. The goal is to launch the show in later in the summer. And there's a lot of big things coming up. But what I want is to use the time and the opportunity that we have now to say, okay, I think I have a lot of great ideas about how to do this. The production company's been very successful at doing this, but I want to know what you want. What you watch stuff you've seen, whether it's watching you or Bongino or Dinesh,
Yep.
A lot of great people and creators here. Isabel Brown, that have done great shows. What do you like? What do you don't like? And you guys have paved the way. Now I can come in from behind and say, tell me what you like about what you watch, what you want differently. Join the VIP section on my Locals channel, Sean Spicer at Locals, and tell me, what is it that you want more of or less of? But that's the beauty of this. And there is a little bit of course, there's a bit of a fear. But I think, as a friend of mine said after I made the announcement, he said, you've always done this. I've been an entrepreneur for most of my life. I've sold everything growing up. My parents' view was, if you want money, you go out and make it. And so I sold greeting cards, birthday cakes, you name it, I did it. Washed car, whatever it took, because that was the view. If you wanted money, you made it. And so,
if you build it, they will come. The idea that I left Patreon and created a subscription model that ultimately became Locals that now Russell Brand is on, and,
I mean,
and
that's
Dinesh sold
right.
2,000 Mules on, and that you're on, and Glenn Greenwald and Crowder and all these guys. It's like, I guess if you actually do something worthwhile, then people show
right.
up.
And so for me, that was it. Like I said, and I'm not being patronizing, but I truly do believe that when you watch people do this and you say, okay, in my own way, I'm not Dave Rubin, I'm not Dinesh, I'm not, but I think I have something to offer. And so if I can bring people into this process, go out and do this every day and say, okay, the Durham report just dropped, or this just happened on Capitol Hill, or Trump said this and DeSantis went this way. Why are they doing that? I mean, like I said at the outset, everybody's got their skill and their insight into something that they've done personally or that God's given them the skill to do. I know politics and party rules like the back of my hand. I mean, for some people that's probably dorky, but I love it. Yeah. And so to be able to say, well, here's the problem. Rule 7 of the RNC rules doesn't permit the following. It's not about liking it or disliking it. It's about explaining it. Yeah. It's literally like when you're watching a baseball game and saying that's a foul ball. You may say it's a great hit and it went really, really far, but it was outside the baseline and it doesn't count. So it's understanding the rules of the game that I think is important as we head into this unbelievable, historic, and consequential election.
I ask everybody some version of this question, politicians and media people. Are you worried that the more that we go in this independent route, that they'll be, okay, the people that watch Spicer, and okay, that's where they're getting their truth from. The people that watch Rubin, they're getting their truth there. People watch Megyn, they're getting it there. And that ultimately, even though our truths are roughly in the same thing, but you do that with all the different voices out there, that we're going to just end up completely living on other planets. Well, we'll all be on Earth, but other intellectual planets. Maybe we're there already.
Well, the thing is, I mean, you listed off your example. I don't think that my truth is that different from your truth. That's
no. So that wasn't the best example.
No.
Me,
but what I'm
Megyn,
saying is,
it's like within the
sure. But I also think that what the problem is, part of the reason that this evolution has occurred is because the ABCs and NBCs and CBSs for a long time were the only options you had. When I grew up, you literally stood up, turned a dial, and that's all you got.
That's old school, man. You didn't even have the box with the wire.
Listen, I'll tell you this: it was like 15 years after cable came out before my parents even caved, and I think that it's like they were required to. They were like, "You'll get up and turn the channel." So this idea that this happened because they didn't do their job.
Yeah.
And they're not seeing stories, and they're watching issues happen and saying, we hear that this is happening. I see it with my own eyes, and no one on these big channels is talking about it. And so I watched, a couple weeks ago, we saw this thing where that gentleman held back the person on the subway. And all of the media kept saying, this Marine veteran killed a homeless man on the subway. It's like, okay, that's not exactly how it went down. And the media keeps framing stories. They've lost us. It's not like independent media just exists. It went out and said, let's try to find people and make this a big marketing exercise. People said, I don't like what I'm seeing. Give me something new. And people like you and Russell Brand and everyone said, great, I will bring it to you. And people said, I like that. But it also doesn't mean that that's the only place they're getting it from. I would encourage people, go watch ABC News tonight. Go watch or listen to an NPR segment, because you're going to see what you don't get, what news is being suppressed.
You'll have to drink heavily.
Right. That's MSNBC.
Right. Oh, they're all drunk.
Yeah.
They have to be drunk. Or
they're just stupid. But that's the problem, is that they created this problem.
Yeah.
They created a void in the market that was filled. And so, great, I'll help fill it.
In summation, Sean, you're telling me I cannot promote this vehicle properly because it doesn't have a name. Is it SeanSpicer.locals.com?
Yes.
So that at least it is.
Yeah.
But we just don't know the name of the unnamed
Well, if you
show.
Join, and if you join the VIP section, Dave, I can get you in.
You can get me in.
For a deal.
Okay, see what I can do.
I mean, I think it's like $4 a month, $5 a month.
All right,
come on, that's
maybe 2 months free with an annual subscription. Oh wow, he's not even doing
listen,
that.
I got kids. Look, I think part of this is that's the beauty of this. Let's do this together.
Yeah.
Tell me what's going on, but join, be part of this, and I think that's the fun part of it. And then over the course of the next several months, we'll go to places, we'll talk to people, we'll bring up issues that I don't think you'll see anywhere else. And again, the thing that's so beautiful about this is I think between the White House, military, time on Capitol Hill campaigns, I can show stuff to you that, frankly, no one else on television or even on the internet does. I mean, there's just no one. I mean, when I left the RNC after 6 years, I think I've been the longest serving person in that post, in modern history at least. So the idea of being able to see multiple cycles and to say, this is what went wrong once, this is how it got corrected, these are the reasons the rules got changed, are all really important to understand the world that we live in, and more importantly, how we can change it. If you don't know how to change it, yelling at the wall or the television or your screen or your tablet isn't going to do anything. But I think what we saw during COVID was that people said, I don't like what I'm seeing. I don't like what my kid's learning. I'm willing to go out and change things. I'm willing to fight for it, to join a school board, to show up at a PTA meeting, and change occurred. And I think that's kind of what we want to offer, is how do we go out and make things a better place? Because I don't like where things are going right now in terms of the woke culture, immigration culture, the threats that we're facing, both from China and abroad. So I want to give people the tools and say, here's how you can actually make a difference.
John, I am but a humble independent content creator, but you, as a former cable news guy, I'm going to give you a chance to look directly in the camera and tell the people where to go to end this program.
Dave Rubin's local audience, please join me on this journey. Help me be successful, as successful, if not more, than Dave. I thank you for allowing me to be here, and please join my Locals community, Sean Spicer at Locals, and then become a VIP member and make this your show as much as mine. Thank you very much. Appreciate your support, and I look forward to your vote. Wait, we're not voting.
End communication.
Yeah.
All right. If you're looking for more uncensored opinions from today's thought leaders, check out our media playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a wide variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.